Hello, hello. Welcome back to Behind the Yellow Curtain. My name is Jess. I'm your host, and this series we call it Sorry, Dropped a Piece of Myself Here. This time, I do want to talk a little bit about how I overcome my childhood trauma as a cultural nomad, and through that lens, how that could potentially encourage you to find your way to heal. And so, when I was a kid, my family background is pretty complicated. They are not the typical happy chirpy family, and at that time, my parents they carried a lot of baggages that they were not ready to really overcome it or not knowing how to navigate it through with the rest of the family member, and then eventually it affects the kids, which was me and my sister. And at that time, depends on the kid, right? All the kids, when they are under a unsafe environment, they do have a way to find a piece of hope or stay positive as much as they could, or just find a way to survive. So in my way, and I think I mentioned this a little bit in the previous episode, I did find the place to escape or see it as escapism through fictional worlds. So whether or not it's movies, storybooks, music, a lot of those contents really helped me get through a lot of difficult chapters as a child, as a young person and young adult, and then growing up. And that is also like similar to a lot of you through stories like Disney or Pixar cartoons and Ghibli's. Those are the stories that it's like the beginning of, especially for children, how they really get their world widened and expanded, because even though it's fictional, even though it might not be real, it is something that is outside what they've already seen at that age. And that is to me as well. I used to be so fascinated by all the fictional things. Once upon a time I did hope to get admitted to Hogwarts, right? I was one of them. And not only that, I think I also got rescued, emotionally speaking and culturally speaking, by anime stories. So a lot of animes or mangas from Japan are the ones that really helped me sort through a lot of emotions that I had at that time with the lack of educations on mental health or how to label your emotions, and no one was telling you how to navigate through those emotions or complexities in life. um, Anime and manga tend to be the things that I went to when I felt really lost as a kid. Nowadays, I realized anime got turned into a trend, but before it was a trend, it was something that really got looked down upon by a lot of people. Like somehow they think just because you're fascinated with anime and manga, comic books, you're a nerd, and then a nerd is a negative thing. I would say though, when I talk to people who also share the same interest, they probably were the most emotionally intelligent people I've ever met in my life. And I know the reason is because all these stories, seemingly fictional, superficial, when you actually dive into it, really help you heal of different levels of how you channel your own emotions and how you really navigate through different emotions and different chapters in life. Like in my case, I really started to be more self aware of my own process, internal process, when I started to watch slash read this story called Fruits Basket. If you watch anime or read manga, you would know this one because it's a classic. In that story, it has so many main characters, and those main characters really represent different trauma, how they go through the trauma, and then how they navigate their own emotions, and then how they grow up as in character. And um, through those stories is really how I find little pieces of myself here and there, and then start to connect the dots, and then come back to my core self and get to know me more without any other external guidance that I could have had in reality. And I think it's also a shared background why people are so fascinated by different story. Like I do have friends who overcome depression through a certain manga or anime, and certain people, they really started to look at life from a different perspective as well. And I think that has a lot to do with how I navigate through life, even through culturally or as a cultural nomad. This is not the only way I find positive escapism. Like I mentioned, I also get fascinated by Western stories and even some folk tales back in Taiwan. And the importance of being versatile in that way is so that you can analyze or you can reflect on who you are, how you are through different layers of or different angles of complexities internally. And this is like similar to an article that I've read a long time ago. It's about emotional intelligence and how you build up your emotional intelligence. And then it says that it's very important to train your empathy because that's how you build up the emotional intelligence. Is all about being relatable, knowing how to be relatable. But however, building up empathy sometimes mean if it's literal, it means that you need to actually go through something yourself to gain that part of or activate that part of your brain. But who has that time in life, right? So another thing that in that article it was mentioned is that instead of forcing yourself to or expecting yourself to go through so many different situations to gain the depth of or expand the depth of empathy is to learn different languages because different languages they have different ways of describing emotions or describing different types of emotions. And I've been realizing that once I started to become fully bilingual and trilingual is when you are fluent in certain language or more than one language, you start to realize there are a lot of emotional descriptions that cannot be described in that other language. And that's what where it gets interesting. Because of that, your brain starts to get activated from different angles where that emotions or that part of your brain really get exercised and massaged when you start to learn that word or start to knowing the definition of that emotion. So I think that naturally started to get built in me when I started to find something relatable in different stories and in different fictional stories. Because what fictional stories do is they remove the realistic part. So if let's say if you see or read or watch any nonfictions, the moment that part of story is not matching your reality, you start to get disconnected. But if some stories started as fictional, you focus on the emotion of it, you focus on the essence of it, not the literacy of the story itself. So that's when you get to actually be internally and emotionally focused on what the narrative is trying to tell you. And because I am naturally fascinated by fictional stories, ever since little, I started to train my brain to get accepted or get massaged by this different sets of emotions. It really depends on the cultural origins of the story that will help my brain to get exercise in different ways. So if it's Western, if it's Disney, if it's Pixar, if it's, like superhero stuff, then it has one way to tell or signal my brains to think or build this side of emotional intelligence versus from Japanese manga, anime. They have ways of telling a story more like in details how a emotion can be so poetic. Then that's how my brain unintentionally let myself to get exposed under these influences. Growing up, I already have that observant radar built in me. So it really helped me to adapt faster in new environments and become independent faster in new environments in that way. And of course, that's totally why and how I survived a lot of my childhood trauma is through ability to relate, to empathize, and then to actually pull myself out of the situations so that I can just observe really helped me get through a lot of traumatic experiences and then go back and review it again or having a higher self-awareness to go back and review again and to see how I can overcome, how I can recover, how I can heal from it. So this is like my experience of an example of starting from little how I got here. And I think this is also worth for you to think about because you probably will get surprised how much you get affected by the habit or the subconscious behavior that has been established ever since you were a kid just because you were in a less advantaged environment in that moment, and you were trying to find a way to find that beacon of hope. And it always comes back full circle in that way. So yeah, this is all I have for you this time, and I'm pretty sure I'll talk pieces of this episode a little bit more through episode dissect. But till then, I'll see you next time. Bye.